Welcome to Holy Defenders. If you like this content, please subscribe and hit the bell. There is an order that has haunted the imagination of the Western world for 7 centuries. Their white mantles and red crosses have appeared in novels, films, video games, and countless conspiracy theories. They are called heretics, bankers, guardians of the Holy Grail, and almost none of it is true. Today, we strip away the myths and let the real history speak. The Knights Templar were something far more extraordinary than legend allows. To understand the Templars, you first have to understand the world they were born into. After 300 years of Roman persecution, the Church emerged from the catacombs and began spreading rapidly across the Mediterranean. But almost immediately, heresies began tearing at her from within. Arianism, Manichaeism, wave after wave of division. When those storms finally passed, a new and far greater threat appeared on the horizon: Islam. Pilgrims had been walking to the Holy Land for centuries. These were ordinary people, farmers, mothers, young men who traveled for months or years simply to kneel where Christ had walked. But as Islamic powers tightened their grip on Palestine, those pilgrims were taxed, robbed, and murdered on the roads. One by one, the paths to the holiest places on earth were becoming trails of blood and fear. In 1095 at Clermont in France, Pope Blessed Urban II called together not just bishops but knights and noblemen. He described in vivid detail the suffering of Christians in the East, and then he called for a crusade, not a war of conquest, but one of legitimate defense. Even in the natural world, every mother defends her young. The Crusades were born not from aggression, but from the most ancient impulse of all, protecting the innocent. In 1118, a D9 French knights made a decision that would change history. They approached King Baldwin II of Jerusalem and asked for nothing in return: no land, no salary, no glory. Their one request was simple: to be allowed to protect pilgrims on the roads to the Holy Land. The king gave them a wing of the royal palace, built on the ruins of Solomon's temple. And so the Knights of the Temple were born. These first Templars were something entirely new, men who had taken full religious vows: poverty, chastity, obedience, and then picked up a sword. They prayed the divine office every day, fasted, wore rough habits, and slept on straw. But they also trained relentlessly for war. Saint Bernard of Clairvaux, who shaped their rule of life, described them as a new kind of knight, one who fought not for personal glory, but for God alone. At the Council of Troyes in 1129 AD, the Church formally approved the Order of the Temple. Bernard's prestige was enormous, and under his influence the order grew with astonishing speed. Their uniform, the white mantle of the monk with the red cross of the crusader, became one of the most recognizable symbols in the medieval world. It stood for something specific: a man who had given everything and who feared nothing but God. On the battlefield, the Templars were simply the best soldiers in the world. Their effectiveness was not just about courage, though courage they had in abundance. It came from 2 things: extraordinary military intelligence. They knew the terrain, the enemy, the roads better than anyone, and perfect strategic positioning. They built and held castles at critical choke points from the Levant to Spain. They were an army that thought as well as it fought. Few people realize that the Templars invented modern banking. Pilgrims traveling to Jerusalem faced a deadly problem: carrying gold made them targets. The Templars solved it. You could deposit your money at a Templar house in Paris, receive a coded letter, and withdraw the equivalent sum at a Templar house in Jerusalem without carrying a single coin. This was the letter of credit, the ancestor of every check, every wire transfer, every credit card you have ever used. Within decades, Templar houses stretched from the Middle East to the Atlantic coast of Spain, a network of fortified strongholds that doubled as financial institutions. Kings and nobles deposited their wealth with the Templars, who managed royal treasuries, issued loans, and financed wars. The French crown became deeply dependent on them. No medieval institution, none, had ever created a financial system of this scale, sophistication, or reach. In 1250 AD, during the Seventh Crusade, the unthinkable happened. King Louis IX of France was captured by Egyptian Muslim forces after the Battle of Fariska. His ransom was set at 400,000 livres, an astronomical sum. When French officers discovered they were 30,000 livres short, Jean de Joinville boarded a Templar ship and demanded the funds. The treasurer refused at first. Those were private deposits, not the order's money. It took the threat of an axe to break open the strongbox. That desperate act planted a poisonous seed. Louis IX resented the Templars for their initial refusal. The story never left the royal memory. Decades later, his grandson Philip IV the Fair would inherit both the debt and the resentment. The Templars had lent the French crown staggering sums to fund wars against England and Flanders. By 1306 AD, the crown was effectively bankrupt. Philip looked at the Templars' vaults and made a calculated, ruthless decision. On Friday, October 13th, 1307 AD, a date that has haunted the Western calendar ever since, Philip IV of France moved simultaneously against every Templar house in his kingdom. At dawn, thousands of knights were arrested in direct violation of their status as men who answered only to the Pope. The charges? Heresy, sodomy, worshipping idols. The evidence? Confessions extracted under torture. The real reason? Money, pure and simple. This is where myth takes over and history gets buried. The torture-extracted confessions mentioned a mysterious idol called Baphomet for 7 centuries. Esotericists and conspiracy theorists have built entire fantasy worlds around that word. But historians have a much simpler explanation. Baphomet was likely a corruption of Mahomet, the medieval French word for Muhammad, a slur they had heard from the Saracen enemies they had spent their lives fighting. That's it, the truth. Here is a myth so persistent it deserves its own slide. The Templars did not found Freemasonry. The Masons have happily stolen the symbolism, the imagery, and even the Baphomet for their own purposes. What philosopher? Gustavo Bueno called Alice thinking, connecting things that have absolutely nothing to do with each other. Freemasonry was founded by a small circle of British Calvinist clerics in the early 18th century. The last Templar died in 1314 AD. Pope Clement V was a weak man in an impossible position. Philip IV had effectively moved the papacy to Avignon, France, placing it under the thumb of the French crown. When Philip demanded the suppression of the Templars, Clement resisted at first, but his independence was nearly non-existent. The papal documents from this period, now preserved in the Vatican Secret Archives, tell the story plainly. A church leader being bullied by a king who owed more money than he could ever repay. Philip IV's motivation is not speculation. It is written in the historical record in his own hand. The seizure orders of 1307 AD, archived today in the Archives Nationales de France. Cases J413 through J417 show the crown immediately absorbing Templar funds and cancelling royal debts. 200,000 livres that Philip had deposited with the Templars were quietly folded into the royal treasury. The charges of heresy were the cover story. The theft was the point. One of the most extraordinary documents in European history is the Paris Interrogation Roll of 1307 AD, an almost 22-meter-long parchment recording the confessions of 138 Templar knights. Modern historians who have studied it are unanimous: every incriminating statement was produced under torture. Many knights later recanted when given the chance to speak freely before church investigators. The truth was being. On March 18, 1314 AD, the last Grand Master of the Templars, Jacques de Molay, was burned alive on an island in the Seine River in Paris as the flames rose. He retracted his confession, the one forced from him by torture, and declared himself and his order innocent before God. According to eyewitness accounts, he called upon both Philip IV and Pope Clement V to meet him before God's tribunal within a year. Both were dead within 12 months. The Templars did not guard the Holy Grail. They did not possess the Ark of the Covenant. They did not hide a treasure that has never been found. These are stories. What they did possess was something far more valuable, a documented financial network. A fleet of ships, a chain of castles, and the trust of half the crowned heads of Europe. Philip IV seized what he could find. The rest, land, properties, assets, was transferred by papal decree to the Knights Hospitaller. The Council of Vienne in 1312 AD suppressed the order, but it did not condemn it. This distinction matters enormously. The Church never declared the Templars guilty of heresy. The suppression was a political act forced by an indebted king, accepted by a captive pope. Many church historians since have described it as one of the greatest injustices of the medieval period. The order died not because it was corrupt, but because it was too powerful and too rich for a desperate monarch to ignore. Here is the truth the conspiracy theorists never tell you. The Templars were, by every credible historical measure, faithful Catholics. They attended Mass, prayed the divine office, gave to the poor, and died with the name of Christ on their lips. The same church that approved them in 1129 AD wept over what happened to them in 1307 AD. Their legacy is not one of secret knowledge or shadowy rites. It is one of prayer, sacrifice, and an extraordinary love for the pilgrims they bled to protect. The Templars left the world to gifts that outlasted them by centuries. The first was military, a model of disciplined, intelligent, faith-driven courage that shaped Christian warfare for generations. The second was financial, the letter of credit, the secure transfer of funds, the concept of the deposit, the very foundations of the modern banking system. The next time you use a debit card or wire a payment, you are, without knowing it, using something a Templar invented. Someone once asked a very good question. If the Templars were truly so holy, why has the Church never canonized one? The honest answer is that canonization requires a formal process, and the order was suppressed before that process could be completed for any of its members. But holiness does not require a papal declaration. The men who gave their lives on the roads to Jerusalem, who died rather than recount the truth, they died as martyrs of something real, something true. The Knights Templar were not guardians of occult secrets. They were guardians of pilgrims. They were not heretics. They were the Catholic Church's most devoted soldiers. They were not mysterious. They were simply good men in an evil time, destroyed by a greedy king and a cowardly political system. The legend was invented to replace the history, but the history is better. And now you know it. Share this with someone still trapped inside the myth. If you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, and leave a comment telling us what surprised you most. If you have any stories about the Knights Templar, share them. Click the bell icon so YouTube notifies you when new videos are released. New content every week. May the Blessed Virgin Mary bless you and cover you with her mantle.